To summarize, I always tell people, I'm not smarter than you or anyone else, but I'm smarter than I would have been if I'd only had one language.
Hi, I'm Sadie Maddock.
And I'm Ciera Thompson.
And welcome to our podcast about language.
On this podcast, we're attempting to discover how language affects perception.
And how culture plays into language as well.
We're going to be talking to some really intelligent people that'll hopefully help us answer these questions.
I'm super excited.
Yeah, we're going to go to Asheville and Boone and all around the university.
Yeah, so our driving question, how does language affect perception?
Okay. Sadie and I are sitting here today with our friend Will. Will, you can just introduce yourself and kind of like who you are.
I'm Will, and I'm a nursing student at Appalachian State University. I spent 2 years at UNC Asheville before transferring in.
My name is Do Yi. I'm also known as Gilliam Jackson, and I'm 68 years old, and I teach Cherokee language at the University of North Carolina at Asheville. And we call Asheville Tokiasti, where they race. There's 3 Cherokee tribes. There's 2 tribes in Oklahoma that got removed during the 1830s. And those of us that remain here, we're known as the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians. In terms of Native American languages, as far as I know, we're the only one that has its own written language that's not in phonetics. We have our own syllabary composed of 86 different characters.
I guess this is kind of where our story starts, and the reason that we're talking to you is because of this Cherokee teacher, Gilliam Jackson.
So,
right?
Gil.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. There's a Cherokee myth about a location called Medicine Lake.
And for 30 or 40 years, people were talking about Medicine Lake. And I'd say, where is it? And those guys that try to act like they know everything. Oh, yeah, it's just, I've been there many times. Or we go up there and get water all the time because it's sacred water. And I'd say, well, how long does it take? It doesn't take long. It just takes a little while.
Gil believes he located the location that the myth is based off of. And so we went on a hiking trip to go to that location, but there's not a trail to get to that location. So,
well, how do you get there? Well, you just go over the mountain. Well, which one do you go over? How do you get there? And how long does it take? It doesn't take long. And they were always just nebulous about it. And I said, well, is there a trail? Oh, you'll find a way. That's kind of stuff. And
so there was a trail maybe a mile into the Great Smoky Mountains, and then we just kind of took like a perpendicular turn and just walked into the woods.
Yeah, this is the one that I was on too.
Yeah. And
so for 30-something years, maybe 40 years, I was trying to find out where it was. And there was one Sunday evening I was looking at my maps, and I've got all kinds of maps because I hike all the time. And I looked at this one map that was in the park, and there were 3 creeks that came together, one from the east, one from the north, and one from the south. And in that map, it made a little pool. And the very first time I went there, I drove as far as I could. I went over a mountain on a trail, and then I just went into the creek and sometimes I'd be wading in the creek, sometimes I'd be wading on the right side and I'd cross over, be wading on the left side, whatever looked easiest. And it took me 12 and a half hours to get in and out. It was incredible. You could put a compass on those, then the 3 rivers that came together, they're at right angles. I mean, I don't know if they're perfect right angles, but to me, if you look at them, they're right angles. And there's a pool that flows to the west. And as soon as I got there, I saw a fish that jumped up in the air and came back down. So that's my experience. I've been up there 5 times, and the one time that I took some students from here, we could not find it.
As you might imagine, it was pretty rough going. Lots of briars and sticks and trees and getting smacked in the face by branches, all to no avail, as we did not actually end up getting down to the creek. We had to turn back, I think, just for...
We hunted and hunted and hunted, and I guess
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you were there. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Uh-huh. It was amazing. I mean, I've been there 5 times. I mean, yeah. I told my sister, and she said, well, somebody was with you that was not supposed to be there. I have a suspicion who it was that wasn't supposed to be there.
Since Sadie was also on the trip, we kind of got the feeling that Gil might have been alluding that she was the person who wasn't supposed to be there.
But we confirmed that it wasn't me.
When we got back from going through the woods to find Medicine Lake, never finding Medicine Lake, everyone was out of water, and I think we had all maybe dreamed of like filling our canteens at the sources of Medicine Lake or something, but of course we never got there, so we were all very thirsty. I happened to have one of the only bottles of water left in the group, which I wasn't going to share, and we came back out of the woods to the trail, and there was just this big, I guess it was a spring, but it was really a puddle that was leading into a creek for way down the hill, and it was just this big muddy pit, and there were pig tracks all around it, so you could tell that like feral hogs had been.
Very appetizing.
No, it looked horrifying. And so we all get out, and everyone's just looking at this pool of water, like knowing what they're about to do.
This is day 2 as well, because we camped.
Yeah, we'd camped the night before.
Camped the night before.
Mm-hmm.
Day 2 of 2.
Yeah. And so everyone fills up their water bottles, and they're sitting on the log drinking like this water, and I remember.
Drank it?
Oh yeah, they drank it. No filter, no
Will,
boiling.
Will and I were the only ones that didn't.
Was it like brown, or
I mean,
did it look?
It definitely
clear
had
enough?
particles in it. It was clear enough, but
Okay.
Not like muddy.
yeah, it
Okay,
wasn't brown, but it was like, the water that they scooped it up from was probably like 3 or 4 inches deep tops,
Got it.
at the deepest places. And yeah, Gil took like a big like gulp of water and kind of like brushed his mouth and goes, "Whew, that water sure is good. Probably has pig shit in it." Yeah, probably did. But as far as I know, no one got dysentery from that trip, which was...
So I'm pretty much involved in language revitalization, language preservation.
So Gil was one of 2 teachers that taught the Cherokee class. There was Barbara Duncan, who was not a native Cherokee speaker and is not Cherokee, but she was very involved with the tribe and worked very closely with the Museum of the Cherokee Indian on the reservation. And she was actually the one who developed this textbook that we are using for the class. It was like, I guess the first Cherokee textbook ever to have been written, called Your Grandmother's Cherokee. So she wrote like every edition of that book that we used. Like, I guess there's maybe like 4 or 5 levels. So she put in a lot of work. And then Gil was our like native representative, and he was Cherokee was his first language growing up.
And I did not begin to speak English until probably 5 or 6 years old when I started school. And at the time that I started school, we didn't have Head Start, we didn't have child development, and so I remember like the words would come at me backwards, like an arrow coming at me backwards, and I had to translate that into brain, and before I could speak, I had to flip it back around to backwards, and I don't.
Barbara kind of ran the class in terms of teaching it by the textbook and explaining, the mechanics of the language.
And she teaches more structure, and I teach more conversation.
We got to hear from Gil how the language was actually spoken and get his insiders' input, 'cause
I'm very happy with the process because I think kids are learning to speak the language rather than just learning the syntax of the language. And
we first met with Gil in a room called Tokiyasti, which is dedicated specifically to the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, and it's in the UNC Asheville Student Union.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in that room, Gil hosts a coffee hour for his students where he meets with them one-on-one or in small groups to work on the language more intimately.
Best students that we have. Oh, yeah. Ciera, Gloria? Oh, see what you? Oh,
So we did have to take a pause in talking with him for the coffee hour, but afterwards we were able to attend one of his classes.
Yeah, and attending the class was a great experience, and then right after we got to continue the interview.
Do you think there are things that are lost in translation between English and Cherokee or Cherokee and English, or do you think it's able to...
It's both ways. There are words that we can try to describe as best as we can, but we just can't get the true meaning across. I mean, I'm decently strong in English, and I'm decently strong in Cherokee, and there are many, many words that I just cannot really translate to the point that you really would get it. That's how I have learned to accept the beauty of our language, is that figuring out, it's so different. Our adjectives are plurals. Our plurals are at the beginning of the sentence instead of at the end of the word. Our nouns are singular. Our sentences are words. I mean, just one word. I mean, I can say one word and I can say, I am cooking a meal. And in English, it's I am cooking a meal. That's 5 different words in English. In our language, it's one word. So it has really opened up my eyes as I began. And I didn't really learn about my language until I started teaching, because I never had to think about it. It just always came out natural.
Right. In talking with Gil, one of the things that I found really admirable is that he discussed a lot of the challenges that the Cherokee language and culture have faced, and he acknowledged those challenges. Rather than becoming despondent, he's decided to teach this class, to take people to these sacred sites, and to really do what he can to preserve the language and preserve the culture.
Yeah.
Okay, let me speak just a little bit more on places like Medicine Lake.
Yeah.
I wanted people to go there so that I knew people would respect it. And there are many sacred sites in this area. And the young people, they don't know where they are. They don't know the stories that go with them. And the old people who do know the stories and who do know something about those, they're not in good enough health to take people, and we're losing those spots. As much as I can, I try to take young people. So that's been one of my goals. And as I get older and I'm still able to hike these mountains, to teach young people, let's go here, and here's the story that goes with it. In terms of the language, it's who we are. It defines us as a people. There's a lot of people, I call people of color, that have lost definition of who they are, And right now I can tell you, I am a Nigadoo-Wagi. I am a Gadua people. I can tell you my clan. I can tell you what our customs are, and I can tell you what that means. I can tell you stuff, and I can teach you about medicine, what it does, and it's all in the language. And I can tell you about plants and what they're good for, and it's all in the language. I can show you plants, but I can't tell you what the English names are. I can't, because I don't know, and I don't really need to know. But I guess in one day, that's all we're going to have is English words. And it's really important to me that these young people carry on the knowledge that we older people have. We have songs that have no meanings that we know of, and so those are going to be lost, and that's really important to me that we carry that as long as we can. In the language, and there's only 205 people that speak the language fluently now, and that's a drop in the bucket. And if you count the people in Oklahoma, I think there's less than 2,000 people that speak the language, and most of them are people my age, and I'm 68 years old, which means, I'm not going to have any kids. I hope I don't. So we're on the verge. Cherokee's considered an endangered language, so that's that's I think that, like I said, it defines me, defines us, and we can tell stories about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you have any questions?
Podcast in the car.
Yeah, well, I feel like, it's like traveling
Yeah.
on the road, chasing the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess we can introduce, I don't know if we need to introduce.
I mean, we can.
We can say our names,
Yeah.
just because it clarifies who's who. So I'm Sadie.
And I'm Ciera.
And we're driving back to Boone from Asheville. We just talked to Gil Jackson.
And we got to sit in on his class and on his coffee hour, which is a way more intimate class. I don't know, it seems like a lot went into the class, and the students had a lot of regard for it.
For sure. I know. It was definitely weird because, of course, I don't know any Cherokee, and so the class was pretty exclusively Cherokee, and so
yeah, for sure. He only talked to them in Cherokee, would ask them questions, and then I thought it was cool how they'd help each other.
Oh, yes.
With the Cherokee language as they asked questions and answered them.
Yeah, and they'd have to translate what the other person was saying too. Yeah, because I know a lot of the language classes I've been in haven't been as the speaking and listening and comprehension hasn't been as stressed as the writing and reading.
Yes, absolutely. That was definitely a big difference. Yeah, I don't think there was hardly any writing. It was pretty much all conversation and students taking turns just practicing verbalizing the words.
Right, and I guess because he mentioned he co-teaches it, and so I guess the other professor maybe focuses more on the writing and specific structure. It's a good combination because it's nice to be able to do everything correctly and to read and write, but at a certain point you really do just want people to understand you. Yeah.
I really appreciated that was kind of Gil's philosophy, and he emphasized it throughout the class of just, if I understand you, then you're good.
Yeah. Or what were kind of the big takeaways as you see it or saw it?
Well, I mean, I think that kind of Gil's passion to preserve the language and to teach it to young people, and then the way the young people respected that, or the students, and took learning it seriously. It seemed from the class we sat in on.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's definitely that sense of, there's sadness associated with it, with kind of fewer and fewer people speaking the language and colonization, but I think Gil does have a very positive approach and is actually taking the steps to do something about it, which is really cool to see.
For sure.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to talking to, because I think Gil, though he teaches, doesn't approach language from an academic perspective. Right. He does approach it from a casual perspective. So I think it will be interesting to talk to professors when we do and kind of hear the more academic side of it.
Yeah, for sure.
We got back from Asheville really excited about everything that Gil had to tell us about language and culture and his relationship with his own language and culture.
Yeah, so excited, in fact, that we went to speak to more people who speak different languages. We met up with one of our friends, Ewan, who speaks Vietnamese, and we met with a college professor who teaches sign language.
And I think one thing that we discovered is that even though language and culture are very individual, there are commonalities between languages, whether they're primarily visual or oral or written.
Xin chào các bạn, mình tên là Uyên, mình 27 tuổi và mình đến từ Việt Nam. Hello, my name is Uyên Nguyễn, it's a long name, and I'm from Vietnam. I live here for 5 years. I am a senior broadcasting in Upstate, and I will be graduate in May 2020. My goal is I want to be a audio engineer or maybe sound design for a movie in the future and documentary movie filmmaking. Yeah.
Cool.
My name is Alicia Toomey. I am an American Sign Language instructor And I'm also an American Sign Language interpreter, a nationally certified interpreter. I've been teaching at Appalachian State University for 16 years, and I began my interest in sign language in college. I had no prior knowledge or experience or exposure to deaf people, but I took a class in college and decided it's what I wanted to do.
So what's your native language, or what was the first language you learned?
Okay, so my native language is called Vietnamese, and English is my second language. I was taught 2 years ago to learn French, but I feel it's too much for me, so I just know a little bit basic, just kind of like bonjour, some basic thing. But English is still like challenging to me. I still need to learn more, improve more to get it more influence, because I still feel like I never have enough to feel like comfortable to communicate with people around me.
What is lost in translation? Are there any words or phrases that are near impossible to get across from American English to American Sign Language?
Yeah, there are. So in English, we have lots of idioms. It's raining cats and dogs. So if I literally signed, it's raining cats and dogs, that's not really what that means. So if you're translating between languages, you always have to think to yourself, what does that conceptually mean? What it really means is it's raining really, really hard. So instead of me signing, it's raining cats and dogs, I would sign, it's raining really hard. That idea. And so you have to be really careful about not getting hung up on English words, because there's not always a perfect translation, and you get as close as you can. There are some English words that have no American Sign Language equivalent, and vice versa. There are some signs that have no perfect English equivalent. We can get close. I always use the example with my students, the word dude. That's a really popular word, and people use it, and it has a very specific connotation to it. I mean, it's not a woman, it's not a man, it's not your best friend, it could be a stranger. But it's not something you'd say to your grandma. Right. Hey, dude. Right. But there's no particular sign for the word dude in American Sign Language. You can sign girl, my friend, that guy, that stranger, that person. There's no word for dude. Yeah. And even if I spell D-U-D-E, it just doesn't give the same feel as somebody saying dude. Yeah. So there's a lot of that goes on.
First year when I cannot speak at all with people because I study academic language. So when I speak to people, it feels too serious, you know? Like, you not get the point at the, daily people speaking. And I am you all the way in the book. It feels so awkward. And I don't, sometimes my pronunciation is not really perfect to make people totally understand what I'm saying. So it by the time it make me feel like, oh, people not understand what I'm saying. So I keep thinking, and then because I'm thinking too much, and it's missing the time. No one have a patience to like just sit there about 5 minutes or 10 minutes to like listen for my story or what I'm thinking, you know. That is so boring. So I keep silent most of the time when people speaking, but that when the time I learn listening a lot and being patient, you know. So listening is a skill, not like you just sit right there and hear people talking. Sometimes your brain, like my brain, running the dictionary in my brain to figure out like what people are speaking, because English is really complicated to me. One word, it have multiple meaning, you know. So I have to figure out like what situation that's word in to feel like, okay, that is meaning of that what people saying.
No, I find it interesting how you mentioned sort of the difference from the academic English, and then there's a certain way that people just talk casually, which reminds me of kind of what Gil was teaching.
Oh, yeah.
the way that he ran his class, he's the Cherokee professor we went to go interview. He would teach them how conversationally people in Cherokee speak, but then they had another professor that would teach them the academic way, so then they could kind of learn both.
Right.
But yeah, no, that's definitely a challenge. I guess in learning any language is there's the way it's taught, and then there's the way that people actually speak.
Yes, so I really wish that at the time when I just moved to America, I can take like English as a second language, that they focus in listening and speaking more, and then I can take like English as a foreign language by the same time, so I can focus like for 4 skills at the same time. So I build them up, and then don't make me nervous to like thinking too much or like take it too long time to speak to people, you know?
Yeah. What was it like teaching sign language and this need to connect with other people? Is it one of those languages that's hard to grasp? Is it typically easy for a student to pick up?
Yeah, I've had both. Some people just instantly get it. So if you're a visual learner, this is a great language for you. There are a lot of students who try to take a foreign language or another language, and it becomes very difficult for them because, number one, if you don't use a language, it's hard to pick it up. Immersion's the best way to learn, and not everyone's going to Spain.
Right.
And conjugating verbs becomes very dry. You know, it's very just technical, and sign language is not like that. It's really hands-on. You have to use it all the time. And it appeals to people who aren't good at these other languages. Sometimes sign language just works for you. It's that visual language works. And so I think it's for Appalachian State to embrace that, and they are right now. We're getting ready to start an ASL minor here next year. It's getting ready to go through the AP&P process to see if that gets approved, but we're pushing for that, and maybe even opening the door for that to be a language option for certain students would be awesome. In North Carolina, the law is that ASL can serve as a language requirement, but each institution has to approve that. So I think it's just a great option for some people to have that visual language option. Yeah. It works for them.
Yeah, so kind of along those lines, how in conversation you talk about how how it can take longer to think about how you want to say something when you're speaking in English. When you're speaking Vietnamese, do you think you come across differently? Like, do you think it affects the way people perceive you? Because, or I guess just, sorry if that's a confusing question, but
no,
okay.
I think I can get the point of that, yeah. It's totally different. Okay, so if you work with me, tell me what you think about me first, and then I will explain to you.
Oh, what we think of you?
Yeah.
You're very straightforward, and you're very reliable and on time, and I would say mostly just straightforward and clear.
It's because I don't want to talk the way to comfort people, like the way to feel like, is it nice to talk? How the way to make it nicer to talk to people, don't hurt people. But I didn't know how to do that. Yeah. So what I'm thinking, I'm just saying that straight, you know. But in Vietnamese, it's different. I will be thinking carefully before I speak, because I know the way I speak will be affect to people's emotion, because I totally understand what I'm saying.
Right.
You know?
When you learn language, all languages are very much tied to culture. They cannot be separated, language and culture. The language is built on the culture, and the culture reflects the language. For example, our idea of water in America comes out of something in your house, out of a faucet in your house, or you buy bottled water. The idea of water in Africa is completely different. It's something you go in the morning, you carry that basin on your head, you get it from the well, you go back to your village. Same with bread. Depending where you live, the idea of bread is very different. Here we buy it sliced in a package. In Mexico, it's flat. and round. In France, it's a baguette. So the words you choose and the language you use is completely tied to your culture. So every country, every culture has its own sign language. Our sign language wouldn't work in India. We don't live that same life, those words. And sign language is very much based on concept and pictures. So you have to have the accurate concept or picture instead of just thinking about a word. So that's really even more tied to culture.
Would you mind talking a little bit about the differences between, I guess, American and Vietnamese culture in regards to language?
So Vietnamese is combined between English and French. So our culture had affect a lot of from French because we are French colony. Yes, so it more romance. That's what I feel, or like more poetry. You know, we had like when people hear Vietnamese people speaking, they feel like it's a song because we go up and down. That is the way people talk, and
culture and language are tied, and you cannot really separate them. So depending what your culture is, where you live, where you grow up, that's affecting your language and how you speak and think about the world, the choices you make. And then the language that you learn is going to affect your perceptions on where you are. I think it's really, really great to be bilingual and bicultural. If you can be exposed to another group of people that's different than you, or even especially another language that's different than you, I think it's really good for your brain. It's good for your personality. It's good for the world. It helps us all connect more. Deaf people sometimes can be isolated because they don't have that communication. And the more isolated we all feel, I think we start to separate. So the more that we can reconnect. And so that's why I love teaching sign language, because I'm opening these doors, I'm opening these ideas of communication, people communicating more. And even learning sign language, even if you don't become proficient in American Sign Language, I think it increases your communication ability. Things like looking someone in the eye when you speak to them. Deaf people need to look when I can't understand sign if I'm not looking.
Right, yeah.
So it just encourages that one-on-one person-to-person communication, which I think is really good for the world.
Could you teach me and Sadie anything in Vietnamese?
Yeah, everyone will be start at like say hello. So you can say xin chào.
Xin chào.
Xin
Chào. Yeah.
Chào.
Like, it have to go down. Because we have a symbol on top of that. So you have like xin chào.
Xin chào.
Yeah. You do it really well. Yes, it is. Xin chào.
Xin chào.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Hello.
So, Sadie, we talked to so many different people who spoke so many different languages.
Yeah.
I think we learned a lot about how language affects perception, but also how language is affected by culture.
Absolutely, because you have language, culture, and perception, and it kind of feels like it's almost a positive feedback loop sort of thing where each one affects the other, but it's not really strictly linear.
I totally agree. That's a really good point. I also think it was cool to see how other languages and ways of communicating are connected. After I finished my interview with Alicia, she told me that the Cherokee were some of the first people to use visual language and sign language to communicate with one another, which made me think of Gil.
Yeah. Gil was such a fun person to talk to and had some really unique insights on this and teaching language and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I loved his passion to teach the language that was kind of shared by Alicia. It was also great to speak to Ewan and hear about how how important language is to connecting with other individuals.
Oh, right. Yeah, because kind of what she touched on was how language and her use of language affects other people's perceptions of her, which was also cool because it's not just language and culture that affect the way someone perceives the world, but it also can affect the way other people perceive you.
Yeah, which is crazy. Language has just as big of an impact on the individual as it does on the greater community that may use that language.
Yeah, I feel like we learned a lot. I feel like there's still a lot to learn.
Yeah, like Alicia said, it's worth immersing yourself in other cultures and other languages, and it can only positively affect you.
For sure.
Yeah.